I don't hang paintings. I hang mattresses on walls.
It's weird. It's a weird thing to do. Very strange.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I won't hold it against you. So this conversation, for anybody watching it, starting at this point, starting now, nothing happened before this. There was no conversation. This is the very beginning.
There was no Luke before now.
Yeah. We've both popped into existence just now to talk about True Detective. I guess this is sort of a mini-series about a mini-series.
I'll be damned.
It is. It is kind of a mini-series about a mini-series.
Yeah.
Just for context, so that anybody watching this or us in the future, many years down the road, who have forgotten everything in our amnesia-ridden old men, just for context, there is a show called True Detective, and I watched one episode, and Matt has seen the whole thing.
Multiple times.
Multiple times. The whole thing multiple times.
Yeah, this will be my 4th or 5th watch through.
Okay, so keep that in mind. My ideas on it might be very, very primitive and almost childlike. And Matt's probably fully versed on the universe and probably has an entire spiel about it. Do you have a spiel?
Oh man, I just need a jumping off point. So I'll leave that.
I'm going to give you one because I thought maybe a good thing to do would be to have the limited know-nothing view, which would be mine, on the first episode, and then have the spiel to sort of dwarf it, if that makes sense. It might. Who knows? I don't know. Because we're going to try to focus on... I have not seen episode 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You have. So my context is I don't really know what happens. I don't know where it's going. So I only have like what's right in front of me, which is right at the end of episode 1. So if you haven't seen True Detective, don't watch it. It sucks.
Yeah, after 4 times you'd think I'd know better.
Yeah. It's a sort of punishment. So does that sound like a good format? Maybe I can just share what I think episode 1 is kind of setting up and kind of about, and then you can have your jumping off point.
Yeah, I think
and we can see where it goes from there.
As a double cliffhanger, because you've got the cliffhanger sort of, I want to watch the next episode now because there's cool stuff I learned about in the first one, and then if I can maybe fill in some gaps or something interesting to sort of salt that interest so it is even more appealing and be like, that'll be a cool thing to watch out for in the next episode. Or, I don't know, sort of
right.
Tease your expectations alongside what's already been teased, maybe.
All right. Yeah, sure. Hopefully without spoiling too much, because I am quite curious. They they left a very interesting. I think what they did was quite bold, because I'm assuming the series gets more intense throughout, but episode 1 is not intense at all.
Yeah,
almost. There's very little intensity. Yeah. It's almost kind of a. Maybe it's just a soft entry. I don't know, but I would worry if I were the producer. We might need to tease more intensity as a way to really get people into the series. So I think that was kind of bold. My whole take on it is that this episode primarily is about setting up who these two main detectives are, and it's less about the murder. I don't think it's really about the murder. I think it's about setting up who these two people are. They're in two different ways. Obviously, they have their characteristics, their own personality types. One being I guess you would say a normal guy, wife and family and kids. It seems like maybe he's not. I don't know. And the other. Do
you remember his line about himself when he's describing himself to the detectives?
No, I can't remember the line.
So it's what you just said to a degree, but with a little bit of flavor. He says, "Oh, I'm just a regular old detective with a big ass dick."
Oh yeah, that's right. He does say that. Yeah. Well, he does seem like a fairly normal, sort of what you would expect in an episode of Law and Order or something like that. He's what you would expect to see, maybe a little bit more laid back than the New Yorkers in maybe a show like that, but still kind of that sort. And then Matthew McConaughey's character Rust seems to me more like the Sherlock Holmesian type in a way, because he's maybe a little bit more insightful about things that his counterpart wouldn't notice, and lives the lifestyle of a Spartan, basically, with the exception of Sherlock Holmes not having the emotional. I don't know how much of his personality is based on the terrible things that happened to him in the past. His daughter, for example. Whereas with Sherlock Holmes, I think his personality is crafted out of pure, aesthetics, basically. I think he crafted that for himself. And you don't really get a sense when you're reading Sherlock Holmes that he's this way because he's been wounded in the past. Right? Doesn't seem that way anyway. I think it comes down to, and then I think it really comes down to the conversation that they have in the car, the first conversation that they have in the car after the crime scene, where they just talk out their worldviews, and Rust actually just explains, this is how I feel about the world. So this is just my take on where it's going to go, and then you can go for a while. I think. Sorry, what's the other detective's name? Marty. I think Marty is going to represent the traditional worldview, and I think that Rust is going to represent the modern worldview, post-religious modern worldview. And I think that's what he describes himself as, a pessimist, more than an atheist. He sees the world from a negative, basically a negative standpoint. He thinks that consciousness is a misfiring of evolutionary processes. He thinks that we're not even supposed to be here, and all of our emotions and our higher intellect and our ability to feel and see are all just sort of secretions that are sort of accidental and weren't really supposed to happen and don't fit within the structure of nature, and we don't deserve any of it. And so if bad things happen, we definitely deserve that. That's sort of, so I think that conversation sets up the two worldviews, and then from that point on, I don't know if they need to have more conversations like that, because they're sort of, now they represent those two worldviews. You have the normal, the traditional, and the pessimistic rational. And we can maybe talk a little bit more about the pessimistic rational later, but I think those two things have been now set up, and those two characters now will act as proxy for those two worldviews. That's what I think episode 1 is supposed to be getting at.
Yeah. No, that's a good observation. I mean, I agree. I think.
And this is half asleep last night at 1:30 in the morning. Like, I was literally watching with my eyes closed.
Perfect.
So it was like a podcast for me.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So 3 kind of interesting points to note out of what you just said. So at the beginning, we're setting up these pair of opposites, right? Pair of opposites is how you get conflict and how you get interesting things to work out, because you've got these two guys that are so they're not diametrically opposed on all levels. It's not like they're at each other's throat.
No, their personalities and their characteristics are diametrically opposed.
Yeah, but they're not fighting each other. They have to work together to accomplish.
It's on a deep. Their diametric opposition is on a deeper level. It's sort of the subtext, except for when it comes out in conversation. Yeah. Yeah,
like philosophical. So deeply on a philosophical level, and so pair of opposites, and that's always. I mean, in movies and in culture and books, music, whatever, pairs of opposites are how you get action, how you get stuff to happen at all. Because if people disagree, nothing happens. There's no growth. There's no change. Yeah, and you mentioned sort of Rust's explanation about his own philosophy, which is nihilistic, pessimistic, just we should all march hand in hand into oblivion and not reproduce anymore, and all that kind of stuff. And he calls humanity, I think humanity, an accident. And I'm pretty sure that is from Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer's philosophy was built around that, not built around, but that was one of the tenets or facets of his philosophy is, humans, we're not supposed to be here. This is an accident. All of this, that sensory secretion that Rust mentions, it's an accident. It wasn't supposed to happen.
Right. It's a byproduct of it's an unfortunate byproduct. And we live our lives inside of it. We think that's everything. And that's what sorry, I keep forgetting his name. It's Marty. Marty. That's what Marty thinks. Marty likes, he's a normal guy. He likes living in that space, even after he says that. It doesn't bother him. It doesn't bother him that that's where he lives.
Yeah. You could tie that into, and that, just to hint at a couple of other interesting things to look up in connection to Rust worldview and the Schopenhauer connection is William Blake. He has a quote, the poet artist from the 1800s. I think he has a quote about, if the doors of perception were cleansed, then we would see nature as it truly is, or something like that. And later Aldous Huxley picked up on that idea as well. And so how that idea plays out in the show is Rust is aware of that. He's sort of aware that all of these things that happen are just sensory perceptions, and none of it is real. We're living in an illusion, and he's sort of detached from it.
No, I wouldn't say that. Living in an illusion? He's saying we're automatons, and we think that we're more than that because of that, the accidental byproduct of evolution that allowed us to have consciousness
and an identity, right? When it's all just that sensory secretion. Yeah. So it is in that sense we have the illusion of an identity and of an experience and all that stuff. I mean, it's really happening, but the way we construct it in our heads and try to explain it is where the illusion comes in.
It seems important to us.
Right. Like Marty, he talks about from just living within the illusion and accepting the illusion as reality, and saying that, this is, how can you say these dumb, awful, terrible things about there is no existence and we should all march hand in hand into oblivion? He's like, because Marty likes the illusion. He likes being inside of it. Whereas Rust, he's sort of stepped back and seen from the outside of it, and he can appreciate it for what it is. Right. And then he even says, I lack the constitution for suicide, and it's something.
I hope we can get into that more later on, because I have some things to say about that. But and it ties into our earlier conversations as well. The only explanation that Marty seems to be able to provide to himself is that Rust doesn't have a family.
Right. Yeah.
And that as though a family would ground you, which it could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and he says to the other detectives that are interviewing him, there's something, when a man reaches a certain age and he doesn't have a family, then something's wrong, or he goes a little kooky or whatever.
That's what he ascribes it to, although it's probably much more than that, because he did have a family.
Yeah, yeah.
But as I understand it, he doesn't know. Now Marty's wife knows that he had a wife and a daughter, but Marty doesn't know, right? Is that correct? As of episode 1. Because he left the room to have a phone call, and then Russ told Marty's wife, I lost my daughter. My wife left after that. And then Marty came back. And I don't think he didn't hear the conversation, but we don't know if they talked about that before in the car, but I don't think they did they? He doesn't know that about him.
Right. I mean, if we're going off of what knowledge we were given in the episode, then we don't know.
I don't think he would make that comment if he wouldn't make the comment that once a man gets to a certain age, if he doesn't have a family. I don't think he would have said that if he had known that he did have a family.
When he says that, that's 10 years later.
Right, but he still did have a family.
Sure. So
he's saying I think I feel that he's referring to a person who never has a family, maybe.
Probably. Yeah.
I think he thinks that he never had a family.
I think when Marty makes that comment, there's just, a man is strange if he doesn't have a family by a certain age. He's just saying that in general.
I know.
It's not really connected to what he knows about Rust. But at the point...
But why is he... Yeah, but he's saying it because of that, because of his character.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But at the point when Marty and Rust and his wife are at the dinner table, I don't think Marty yet knows about Rust's familial past. So there's no indication that they've talked about that. But yeah. So and so we got the Schopenhauer thing, we've got the pair of opposites, and then the other thing I wanted to mention about just ways to interpret these guys as it goes forward is the Apollo Dionysius theme that you can find in tons of movies and tons of books. You've got, so on the one hand, you've got Marty, and he would be the Dionysian archetype in the sense that he's a man of the world. He enjoys alcohol. He has a family. He is enjoying the world. And on the other end of that, you've got the Apollonian archetype, which is Rust, and he's the cerebral, reserved, conservative in the sense that he doesn't sort of let go. I mean, you can tell he's called the tax man. He keeps a ledger, an account of everything that happens. He says in that episode that you never know what little detail is going to break the case way down the line. So he's a detail-oriented, uptight, for lack of a better word, individual who he's tuned into sort of mysticism, esoteric knowledge, because when they approach the crime scene and they see the girl at the tree, he's already working in his head out all these details that he's read about in all these books that he has in his apartment that are all about serial killers and metapsychotics and all that kind of stuff. So he's already reading into it the symbology of what's going on and applying it to psychology, right? So that's what kind of Campbell and Mircea Eliade and all these guys, Joseph Campbell and Mircea Eliade, that's what they were doing. They were saying, well, what do these symbols mean? What does it tell us about the psyche of this individual who is creating these scenes? Well,
this scene in this case, but he's pretty sure that it's happened several times.
Right. He's like, this is too specific. It goes way back. And so, go ahead. No, go ahead.
So is that something that you came to, the archetypes of Dionysus and Apollo? Is that something that as you were watching it, it came to you as you were watching it, or is it something that you had to think about and reflect on?
I think the idea of looking for the Apollo Dionysius contrast in movies, or in anything, really showed up with the movie Casino, because in Casino you've got Joe Pesci.
It's been a while.
Yeah,
I saw
you
when
got
I
Joe
was
Pesci
12.
and who's Al Pacino, and again that's when I looked at Scorsese and was like, oh man, this guy is tuning into mythology and these archetypes, because in that he's got the Dionysian and Apollonian dynamic as well. Joe Pesci is the Apollonian, sort of violent, temperamental, aggressive character who wants to enjoy everything while he can have it. And then Al Pacino's character is the measured, consistent, sort of conservative, cerebral thinker.
So that wouldn't that be the opposite then of what you just said?
Sorry, yeah, you're right. Yeah, yeah. Joe Pesci is the Dionysian model, and then Al Pacino is the Apollonian model. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Haven't seen that movie in a while, but maybe more so because I think the notes of that in at least this first episode, they're not that strong. I mean, yes, he's a family man, but he spends plenty of his time away from his family too, and seems to be pretty into his work. And is he that into drinking? Well, maybe he has a glass of whiskey as he watches his children sleep. I mean, it's not clear. It seems like it might be there. It's kind of subtle in episode 1. I didn't get anything like that very strongly. But yeah, I agree with your the general idea. I think that makes sense. He's certainly a man of the world, and as I was saying before, he's a man of the world. He's a normal. He's what you would expect if you were an alien and you were writing down a general summary of human being from America, right? Male human from America. That's probably what you would write down, something like that. Enjoys watching his kids sleep with a glass of whiskey, and then the other side you would write down if you were going to talk about the outliers, probably. Yeah, and I mean, if I had a dime, having grown up in the South, and if I had a dime for every time somebody asked me, "You're a Christian, right?" Just knowing the answer. I mean, him asking that being written into the script is an indicator of him being Joe the worker or Joe the American, whatever. I mean, that's I think the overwhelmingly distinct impression of him as a character, and he's remained that fairly stable, seems to have remained that way 17 years later when they're doing the interview. Whoever those guys are, I have no idea, but it seems like something happened to Rust. I don't know what happened to him, but it seems like something happened. He either became more cynical and jaded than he was before, hence the very soft blonde mustache and the desire for beer at noon, or something happens in this story that hints at his what's going to happen later. It's not clear in episode 1 exactly why there's a distinct character difference between them. I don't feel that there's a character difference present and 17 years later for Marty, but there's definitely been some. Rust has clearly undergone some changes in his personality over the 17 years. He seems maybe even more pessimistic.
Yeah.
In a way.
Well, I think. Yeah, I thought that might be. There was a segue in there into the crime scene itself, like the whole thing that kickstarts the episode. Oh, yeah. So you were talking about sort of the dynamic between the two, where their characters being a little bit not kind of unclear or not as pronounced. I don't know. You said it a second ago. I lost it, but
I said not for Rust. I think Rust's characteristics are pretty pronounced, but I think that Marty's characteristics are not pronounced as, say, Al Pacino Casino character, not as pronounced, maybe. Yeah. I don't even know if it's Al Pacino. I want to preface that by saying I haven't seen Casino since I was 12.
It's Robert De Niro.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, is it really Al Pacino? Is it Robert De Niro? I don't remember, because I remember what the poster looks like, and I remember seeing Robert De Niro's face, but I thought maybe Al Pacino was facing away from the poster when they took the picture, behind Robert De Niro, and Robert De Niro, he just plays the footstool.
Yeah. No, it's Robert De Niro. That's right. And I just, it seems like, I don't know. Well, what did you, after I say all that stuff, what's your take on it? What do you think?
Oh, I now that you say you bring up the archetypes, I completely agree. I didn't put it in those terms. I didn't sort of make the connection between the archetypes, but I can definitely see that, and that's clear enough. And I don't know if I'm right in saying that then those two archetypes will then be proxies for the respective worldviews, and we can sort of see them that way throughout the series, or it's going to get deeper into those kinds of conversations. But I think the way they've set it up is interesting because it sort of allows us to explore two separate worldviews within the context of two individuals. And so we can sort of say everything that happens with this character and this character, we can see it as, in a way, not a battle, but some sort of a playing out of the... we were having in our last conversation, we were talking about the fewer people being the ones to be outliers, because that's how it has to be. There's people who are like Rust, but those people have to be few, sort of just by the way society works. It follows the Pareto principle, kind of like that. We can kind of see these two as proxies for these two respective worldviews, and sort of think about those worldviews as the characters interact, and think about how the worldviews interact. So yeah, that makes sense. I think you certainly put it better than I could, though.
Yeah, and that dynamic. I mean, once anyone is clued into that, I mean, take it to other movies, take it to other books, and it's like, oh, okay, now I see what the author or the director is trying to get across to me, why they have these two characters set up against each other, because of what that sort of conflict and action will reveal, or how that conflict and action will make sort of progress or motion towards some other truth or some reality. Yeah.
Now, I would like to get your thoughts on the crime scene itself, because so you got a crime scene, spoiler alert, a prostitute, probably, face down in a ritualistic sort of pose, tied at the hands, with her head tied to deer antlers and a sort of spiral symbol on her back, and then above her a kind of devil catcher, maybe, sort of ritualistic looking contraption. Clearly it has some symbolism, right? But beyond that, beyond just saying, okay, that's there and that's there and that's there, they didn't really explore what those things might mean, and I didn't think about what they might mean that deeply. I was sort of just following along, and so I don't really have much to say about the symbolism of the way that she was positioned, or I don't really know. It's just it could be done in a way, if they really wanted me to wonder what those things are, I think that they would have had to present it differently. Even though I'm not crazy about the film The Da Vinci Code, the way that the details are presented, you're suddenly completely consumed by ideas about what might be going on, and these sort of clues that are there. Maybe just the direction, I don't know, the style, the way that it's done. It makes me, when I'm watching a movie like that, it makes me constantly think about, what could these things mean? What could this be? What could that be? And when I was watching this, I was thinking more about, he has a very interesting personality, and he has a very interesting personality, but I don't really care about these symbols. You know what I mean? I don't know if that's just me and it was late, or if that's how it's supposed to be. But
yeah, I think potentially something that might shine some light on maybe why we would perceive it is that in the Da Vinci Code, you've only got 3 hours to get across an entire story, and this is
fair enough.
8 hours to to sort of slow burn it. But yeah, so the symbols. All right. Oh man. Oh
boy.
Put on my symbols pants.
Put on my symbols glasses.
Yeah. So there's the tree, and the body. The
tree is the thing. I thought it was just a tree.
It's the world tree. It's the Axis Mundi.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah. So it is the ground for this entire story. We start off at the center of the world, and everything that happens started at this tree, at this scene of the crime. So the rest of the story is going to revolve around and going to start at this point, and always going to come back to the original crime. The original crime, the whole reason this got started is because this whole world of True Detective, this whole series of events started there, right? Mm. So it's kind of the Axis Mundi, the world tree, Yggdrasil, the point of it's the center, it's the Bodhi tree, it's all that kind of stuff. Mm.
It didn't hit me at all.
Well, and I mean, after having watched this thing 4 times, and then on top of sort of Rust's interest in symbols and saying it's too specific, it's kind of, okay, this guy, Nick Pizzolatto, the writer, mm-hmm. He knows what he's talking about. He knows that he's dealing with symbols. So watch out for symbols, and they're going to be everywhere.
That's what I was telling myself too, and I still didn't get the tree.
Yeah. All right. So
actually, what I was telling myself was Matthew Lewis asked me to watch this show. He recommended it. It must be chock full of symbols.
Yeah. Because I think it can, because all those symbols and the way a writer will take them and try to say something with them, it's essentially them playing with a new or with a type of vocabulary. And the cool thing about these symbols in the show is that the vocabulary is a very basic vocabulary to humankind, not just to people from Asia, people from Russia, people from Spain, people from the US, but it's a sort of a universal human level vocabulary. So that's why I go nuts over it. It's just fun to play with it and try to figure it out and get some insight into something. I don't know. But so we got the tree, then we got the dead body, right? And it's a female, a nude female. She's dead. She's got puncture wounds to her stomach from a knife. She's sort of in a kneeling down praying position facing the tree. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to explain too much that would give away the rest of the series or anything that you have to look forward to. But, man, what can I say? Well, the symbol on her back. Okay. So she's got that sort of spiral symbol on her back.
Yeah.
So spirals start to show up in anthropology in like earthen, but not bakeware, but earthware a long, long time ago. It used to be you just had plain stuff, and then you started to see sort of iconography and things like that show up in all these old clay pots and stuff. And one of the earliest symbols that show up was a spiral. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it even showed up in a swastika. But just to talk about really briefly the long history of the swastika, we all know it from the usage that the Nazis
it's a Hindu symbol originally.
For. It's like a Hindu symbol of life. And normally it's, instead of, like in the Nazi stuff, it's
not
sort
squared,
of in a diamond
softer.
shape.
Yeah.
Huh?
It's tilted on its another axis. Yeah.
Right. I think it's just normal. It's just kind of parallel and perpendicular, right? Mm-hmm. It's straight up and
you see it everywhere in India.
Yeah. And what it was used to symbolize was just the revolution of life. It wasn't supposed to be. It wasn't evil. It wasn't good. It was just used to remind people, hey, there's a circle.
Yep.
Life, what ambulates around the center.
There are a lot of circular analogies and symbols in India, throughout India. I mean, on the flag itself, the flag of India has the wheel of Dharma is on the flag. I guess it represents the spinning wheel as well, but it's a really ancient symbol that represents the concept of Dharma. And when I first came to India and I saw all of the swastikas everywhere, I thought, oh, these Indians are a bunch of Nazis. Then I realized
it's like
it's an older
thousands
symbol.
of years old.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and so the swastika and the spiral, they have a connection in that sense that they just show this passage of time, this sort of wheel of time, kind of like that wheel of Dharma you're talking about. It's just to show, and also you can think of in Kundalini Yoga for the name of, I forgot the name of the serpent in Kundalini Yoga, but the translation into English of that name means the coiled up one. And it's a snake that's coiled up. And, when you begin Kundalini Yoga, the snake is coiled up. And the point of the yoga is to uncoil it so that the energies go all the way up the spine to the outside of the top of the head and all the way back down.
Right.
And so, and there's, Campbell talks about Kundalini Yoga and that coiled up one. And then all this stuff kind of intertwines and interacts with one another. So, you can, maybe in some way you can think of that symbol on her back as, okay, this is a starting point
I see.
Of us trying to reach enlightenment. Right now we know nothing. We're in darkness, we're uptight, and we're uneducated about whatever we're getting into. But by the end of this, if this Kundalini Yoga is a proper analogy, we're going to reach enlightenment about something. We're on a journey, right?
So, yeah. On several levels.
Yeah, and if you think of a spiral as a labyrinth, then that means you're just getting into. We're getting introduced to the labyrinth.
It represents yet unearthed potential.
Yeah, and a progression from one point to another. So there's that in there too. The devil catchers, I don't know. I haven't really focused on that when I've been viewing it, other than it just being sort of folk mythology and folk religion, or religion that's sort of outside of the status quo, outside of the standard religion.
Well, that's one thing that I'm sort of thinking about now as I reflect on episode 1. Am I supposed to be thinking about a conflict between the sort of traditional Christian worldview of the people in this area who are obviously more sort of devout traditional Christians versus some sort of, I don't know, deviant force, or is this supposed to represent some sort of mutilation of Christianity? Does it mean anything? Does it mean something? I don't know yet, because the only thing that hints that it might be some sort of real conflict of ideologies is when I forget who it is, but there's some minister or something comes and says we are in a time of I forget what he says. There are greater things happening here. This is a time of war between.
There's a war behind
things. Yeah, and that sort of suggests that there's this normal, maybe Christian worldview, and then a force opposing it. But that's not the force opposing it is not obvious, because we have so far one thing that's happened, and symbols which are not explained that you could think through or not, and I clearly didn't really. So far in episode 1, if there is a war going on, the only thing to go on really is the fact that there is something that's not a Christian symbol involved with this murder, and then there's this guy who said that there's a war behind things. That's about it. That's the only thing that clues it in. So
let's set that guy, Reverend Tuttle, that comes into the police station and says we're thinking about setting up a task force to investigate specifically anti-Christian symbols. Let's set him up against, remember the minister that they go visit is out in the bayou, the black minister?
Yeah. He's the guy who tells them about the devil catchers, right?
Yeah. He sort of clues them into a little bit of that sort of esoteric folk knowledge, because he says, when Russ says, hey, will you take a look at my ledger I've got, do you recognize any of these symbols? And he's like, yeah, that spiral, I don't recognize it, but these over here, that looks like something that my auntie used to make, or used to help us make as a kid.
They would have the kids make it, something to do.
And he said about his auntie that, she loved her some Jesus, but she had a little bit of that Santeria in her. So
that's a good line, by the way.
Yeah. So she has a little bit of that non-sanctioned or unsanctioned. She practices a little bit of that unsanctioned religion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Voodoo stuff. Maybe.
Yeah. And so that sort of plays into that idea. Okay, what are the forces at work here? We've got maybe this traditional religion, then we've got this sort of maybe older, more of the people religion, which I was just reading in Mircea Eliade today about, sometimes when this happens all throughout history, when a new religion or when a dominating force comes in to take over a civilization or a people, and they try to replace that people's religion, in the example or in the instance of Christianity, when Christianity came in to dominate a people and they tried to wipe out those folk traditions, it was really hard to do it. I mean, people just kept practicing their old ways in a lot of cases. And so it's hard to stamp out. In a lot of cases, the new religion just tried to assimilate the old ways and say, okay, well, we're going to turn the festivities of the Maypole into instead of this pagan celebration, which eventually turns into an orgy, we're going to turn it into a celebration of labor, right? So in the sense of, in the past, it was a celebration of the fecundity of the field, of fertilizing the field so that we get good vegetation. But the way people would do that, practice that right, is they would go have sex in the fields. Then they would have an orgy after this big feast celebration, right? And so when you get this more conservative scheme that wants to come in and dominate that and make those people its own, it says, okay, well, we're not going to do the unsanctioned activities related to this, but we're going to keep the labor aspect of it. So we're still going to work the field, but it's going to be work. It's not going to be we're not going to have that sort of strange pagan, earthy, sexual side of it.
It's like,
but we're going to,
taking paganism and putting it through a Christian sieve, basically, is what it looks like.
Yeah. And so, there's a little bit of that going on in the story as well. I don't know.
Not obvious yet, though, because not
very small.
Yeah, because that single comment, I did kind of pick up on that. Why did he? I thought to myself, why did he say that? Why did he say that? But it didn't. I feel like it's not enough to really go on. And if they're going to explore that as a theme, then later episodes are going to have to get into it more seriously, and I imagine that they do. I hope.
Yeah, and I just fleshed that out because
do they?
It's just what?
Do they? Will we get more of that in future episodes?
I don't know how major of a theme that conflict is. I think it maybe is something that you can, it's a lens that I just gave you, and not like it's now a lens. Yeah, you're welcome.
I appreciate it.
Did I lose you?
Well, making that sound caused the internet to the internet couldn't handle it for a moment there. It's okay now.
Are we back?
No, we're back.
Okay.
Yeah, well, you did this, and then I think it crashed.
And I cursed it.
The sensors were watching, and they when they heard it, it made them hit the wrong button, and there was a disruption.
Yeah.
In the web.
But tell me if that's as you watch more episodes. Tell me if that's a valid.
That's interesting because that's what I'm looking for, right? Because honestly, I want to see more than just an 8-hour investigation of a murder. I now know the general frame of the story. I know that they're probably going to be in these interview rooms for the entire series. That's my guess, because it doesn't end with them doing that. I'm guessing they're going to be doing the interview 17 years later ongoing. I'm guessing that's going to be sort of the thread that ties, or how they contextualize these sort of flashbacks. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But what I want to see a story that has a religious battle as a subtext and a worldview war or a conflict between worldviews as a subtext. So I'm looking for it. So when you tell me that, I'm happy to hear that that's what you're seeing, and I hope that there's more of that, because I feel like if they want to push those ideas, maybe they need to bring in a few more elements, because it's almost at this point from episode 1, if you were to say this story is actually about a clash between the more paganish ancient religions and Christianity, if you were actually going to say that from episode 1, it would be way too speculative. You would be just saying that and hoping that it were true, right? Because it's clearly not yet a concrete theme. So, unless that's just what you really, really want to think. But if there are more elements in future episodes, then it becomes clearer that there's sort of a pattern of those things mentioned. Even if it's small things, if they keep bringing up little pieces in conversations here and there, then okay. But at this point, from episode 1, I can't say with confidence that is a core theme. I hope it is. But from episode 1, I couldn't say that.
So that's cool that you brought that up, because remember when they go to the Black Pastor's church in the bayou, he says, "Did you guys come out here about those cats? Those cats that somebody had killed and turned inside out and nailed to the door."
Yeah.
So that is a reference to an H.P. Lovecraft story called The Cats of Ulthar, which in that story, I read it a few years ago now, but there's these mutilated cats that start these instances of cat mutilation, which happen in some town. And in the show, it's a reference to that. It's just dropping this hint of that, okay, I know about H.P. Lovecraft, and I'm going to plant this seed for you if you know about this story. So you start thinking that there's some sort of old gods, Cthulhu, Lovecraftian, cosmic horror elements that are woven into this series. He's like, I know about this stuff, and I'm going to write it into this so that your interest gets piqued into some cosmic old gods versus new gods religious battle that's going on.
Yeah. So
it's there totally.
Yeah, good. I hope there's more of it. I didn't know the Lovecraft reference either. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, there's
did they revisit that at all?
Well, even in this episode. So remember when they see the sketch artist's drawing of the guy that supposedly chased the little girl through the woods?
Yes.
And he was a green-eared spaghetti monster?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a reference to some of the monsters in others of H.P. Lovecraft's stories. These green tentacled monsters. So I think even that description there, again, is another, hey, I know Lovecraft, and this is sort of inspired by his work. So there's that. I mean, I don't want to give stuff away, but...
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Are you avoiding giving stuff away? That is clearly there? Okay. But just because with that reference only, that's not satisfying to me. I can appreciate that, but I don't like it. Because
okay.
It almost annoys me a little bit. If someone is going to just drop a little nod to something else, so if he's going to drop a nod to Lovecraft for those who have read a particular story, that's nice. But if you're going to be serious in actually building elements from something into your story, right? It has to be accessible to everyone watching it. In other words, you have to be able to glean. Well, okay, I should say it. If you want it to be enjoyed on that level, it has to be accessible to everyone who watches it, in and of itself. So what that means is they're two different things. One, referencing somebody else is a sort of fan service for H.P. Lovecraft followers, but it's not a theme in the story. Because it's sort of the Lovecraft is the key that might show you that there are some sort of hidden elements of that in the story. But if it's a true theme in the story, then I think there has to be some indication beyond a reference to somebody else's work within the story itself that indicates that this is part of this story. So when I saw the cats, okay, I haven't read that story, so that means nothing to me, but I wonder why the cats are there, and I expect the story to answer the question, or at least give me some hints as to what's going on. And if it's an exclusive hint for people who follow or who have read that particular story, then I find it much less interesting. I like stories that build in their themes in a self-contained way that don't require specialized knowledge outside of the story. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah.
Because you may send me some links, and you may send me some quotes, and you may send me some things that might help me understand things as you understand them, but I'm not going to look at them until I finish the entire thing. I'm trying to go through this because I think that hopefully that's part of what's more interesting about this conversation. I'm trying to go through this story purely, right, from my own perspective, and I want to understand the themes in my own way. And I think I've read less of that stuff than you have, and so I think a good storyteller who wants to weave in a theme needs to know how to make the theme apparent, even if it's in the subtext but self-contained, as opposed to requiring add-ons, which is basically what you just mentioned. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, and I'd bring up two things to throw in that mix. Is that, number one, there's 7 more hours to go.
Yeah. I know. We should mention that. I realize that. And
I think the other thing is, by him mentioning that at all, it just kind of adds a tone of there's just weird stuff going on around. It's just, it's a violent sort of primal area. Like, people mutilate cats out here. Why? That's just
it gives it. Yeah. I'm not saying that he has to answer the cat question within the story. That's not quite what I'm saying. I'm just saying for weaving in a theme, I hope that in the future that the theme is a self-contained theme within the story. Does that make sense when I say self-contained?
Sure.
Yeah. That's what I mean. There's more to it. I just wanted to bring it up because so as you're going through the show, that all of your receptors are open to how dense and how rich the story can be. Like, for instance, to nod to how well the writer or writers know their subject matter and how dense with iconography it is. Remember in the morgue when the mortician or the coroner says, or Russ says, well, what are these specific herbs, or what do these specific branches or antlers mean? And he says, I don't know, that looks like some primitive stuff. You might want to contact an anthropologist about that. So it's okay. We know it's just, again, this is old stuff. That's a nice hint. That one is a self-contained little tip, like a little beep that comes up on the screen that says, "Hey, look out for this stuff." I got that. I got that one.
And then
I don't know. So I think going back to what you're saying about the tone for a second, they want to set the tone of this place being sort of more primal. The setting of this story is more primal in a sense than a story that you would get maybe in a city because of its location, because of the people who live here, and they present that very well. But those elements come across more strongly through just the visuals when they show them just driving through trailer parks, and they show the houses far apart, and then just the location indicates that this is going to be a place where, because all of these people live kind of far away from each other, there are plenty of opportunities for each one of these people, because they're sort of so isolated and far away from civilized society. All of these people could be nuts in their own way. That's sort of the sense that comes across. And then and you get the same sense when you're at the truck stop. That's an entire world, a little microcosm there, a cultural microcosm where you have a little community of prostitutes, and the police are buying drugs from the prostitutes, and it's just that is normal within that microcosm, but it is so far away from anything that maybe anything that I would ever be familiar with. It's so far away from that it's like showing a panoramic view of an alien planet. When you get that panoramic view of the alien planet, you're in a strange place. Then they have the scene. Those things, when they show them, when they show the prostitutes coming out of the trucks, and they show the swamps and the trailers, it just makes it clear that we're on an alien planet now. If that makes sense, it feels like it's an alien planet. And he even says we could be. What does he say? We could be on Mars.
On the moon.
On the moon. It feels like
people could be living on the moon or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a nice tone for the story. It makes it very different. It makes it very alien, even though it's in America.
Yeah. It's aberrant. Yeah. It's just weird.
Yeah.
Hence weird fiction, where the story, H.P. Lovecraft, Robert W. Chambers, he's going to play it. He wrote The King in Yellow, which a lot of the references and a lot of the names from the show come from that book, which is a collection of stories. Anyway, it's a source material for the show. Yeah.
So there's a reading list.
Sure. Isn't there always?
You should put together a reading list for people who watch the show.
Yeah, between projects.
What is the reading list? H.P. Lovecraft,
Robert W. Chambers, Joseph Campbell, always on the reading list.
Joseph Campbell could be on the reading list for absolutely anything.
Yeah.
What do I need to go to the bathroom? Joseph Campbell.
Yeah, keep a few copies on hand. So it was, you mentioned the landscape of Louisiana, and you mentioned the swamp. I mentioned the swamp, and
well, the houses. It's kind of struck me. The houses struck me as very close but separate.
And where they're up on stilts as well.
Yeah, close but separate means in suburbia you would see houses that look the same, and it tells you that the people are the same. Whereas here you have shitty houses, some of them on stilts, some of them over on a little hill, relatively close together-ish, but clearly within each one different kinds of crazy going on.
Yeah.
So it feels wilder because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's unpredictable. Sure. It's jarring. It's a little jarring, and it's a little unsettling.
Yeah. Uncivilized?
Yes, I hope nobody from Louisiana is watching this, but yes, uncivilized.
Hey, the writers wrote it, not me.
Hey. Yeah. Fair enough. I also wanted to I think we come at things maybe a little differently in general. I think we generally do. I think you are more interested in I think I could be wrong. I think you're more interested in the symbols and the mythology and those elements.
Not at all. No.
Yeah. Then why are you wearing that hat? And I think I'm more interested in
coffee mugs.
This is my coffee mug. L stands for Lima. And I'm more interested, I think, maybe I don't know if I'm more interested, but I think I'm more interested in the deviant worldview of Rust. That's my favorite part of the show so far. I like how he thinks, and I'm very interested in his personality, and I'm very interested in learning more about it. More so than the symbols. I'm fine. I'm interested in that stuff, but I'm more interested in his worldview, and I was most struck by the conversation in the car more than anything else, because I think that was very well written, because it was a 1-minute conversation basically, and it laid out, I feel, the whole tone of the relationship between these two characters. And that after he found out who he really was and what his sort of philosophy of the world is, he said, "Don't say that stuff anymore. I don't want to hear it."
Let's make the car a safe space.
So
for
rather
reflection.
than so I think that's so interesting that, and it represents to me what how do I want to say it? The way that I feel about how most people view abnormal ideas. And rather than, when you are exposed to something new and different, being interested in that and going deeper, creating a new wall and continuing on your merry way, if that makes sense. And maybe it's not even deliberate. Maybe that new wall is just something that's an automatic defense mechanism to maintain normality. But regardless, whether it's intentional or it's a sort of subconscious thing that happens, by saying it almost outright, he says, "Let's not talk about that stuff." By saying it outright, it becomes unambiguous that this is now the difference between them. And I think that making that not subtle is what makes their difference now really interesting to explore. If they had made that too subtle, then it would have been, I think, a little bit less... we would probably had to explore it as the show goes on, but now it's like from the very beginning, they're stating it. Now we begin to, with that sort of assumption in mind, look at it that way. Sort of like you've given me a couple of new goggles to wear as we continue the next ones. That is a pair of goggles to put on about these two people. And it's very important that happens in the first 10 minutes of the show, basically. On Rust's view of the world and his philosophy of pessimism, I'm really interested in why he's a pessimist, and it kind of ties into some of our earlier conversations. So he views everything through a negative lens, and he thinks that humanity is basically a byproduct of evolution's creation of prefrontal cortex, right? Basically. And that sort of one thing that sort of popped out of that process was the ability to feel that we are important and we are somehow the center of our respective worlds, even though that we're not, and it's all a delusion that we have, right? We're incorrect in thinking that, but that's what we think. And I think his view is negatively tainted, though, not by that perspective. I think his view is negatively, so he goes negative with that because of his daughter's death, not because of the view itself. So we had previously a conversation about what is the guiding star of the 21st century post story that we've used before, right? And and I don't know if this show is trying to say that that being completely rational, an atheist, whatever, is the thing that makes one pessimistic. But it seems to me that it's not. It seems to me that it's more his daughter's death that made him that way, and his views, his non-religiosity is what made him sort of able to take on the negativity and the pessimism. So sort of like the pessimism is added onto the rationalist view of the world, if that makes sense. Because I would contrast that with I was just reading Richard Feynman's a book by Richard Feynman on the way here after my gyro, and was wiping the sweat off my brow because it took a while to you got to kill it, you got to gut it, and it's really sad to put those little gyros down, but you got to do it because you got to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Life goes on life.
Yes, exactly. And he's got the same basic worldview as Rust in the story. That he would probably, if he had to look at it and really think about it, he would probably have to see consciousness as a byproduct of evolution's popping out of our big prefrontal cortex. I don't know why I have trouble saying that. You're the one drinking wine. I'm having Coke Zero. Prefrontal cortex. He would probably say the same thing, but he's not negative. He's not a pessimist. He
Feynman.
was Feynman. Yeah, Feynman.
Yeah.
He was distraught over his involvement in the Manhattan Project and being basically a crucial piece in making that come to fruition, resulting in the death of hundreds of thousands of Japanese in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So someone with a completely rational view of the world, not religious at all, distraught over the deaths of something that over deaths caused by something that he helped to create. He has no reason to be upset. So I wonder if that's going to be explored more in this show, and I hope that it is. I hope that the pessimism part is explored, because I think it's sort of almost saying rationalism equals pessimism, which I don't think that it does, because I would say that it's more of a neutral space, and then other maybe deeper things about what our personalities or the structures of our brains or horrific events that happen to us. Those things then shape and color that sort of neutral view of what is reality and who are we actually. Yeah, it's true. We are just byproducts of evolution, and we probably shouldn't be here, but I don't think that shouldn't necessarily have a negative spin. And I'm very interested to see if that's something that's explored more, or if that's just sort of baseline, now we move forward, that's who he's always going to be. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what you think about the next 7 episodes. You get a lot to look forward to.
Yeah.
I'll give you that.
Do you have anything to say about what I just said?
So the first time I saw this series, I was in a rough spot. It's 2015, and didn't have it yet. Bad year. Yeah. Bad year for sommeliers and wine drinking too. Yeah. So anyway, I was in a pretty dark space myself, and then I think I found the show from my roommate, and I can't remember if I binge watched the entire thing, but basically I was in love with Rust. It was this guy, everything that comes out of his mouth is gold. It's just, how did he become like this? I agree with everything that he says, and it just made this kind of cold hard sense. This is how the world functions, and this guy is unfazed by everything. He's completely rational. He's also pessimistic, like you said. The pessimism is kind of tacked on. Not unfazed, but if you 98 out of 100 times he's cool as a cucumber, and
well,
just
in his professional life, he's
steady.
cool as a cucumber. If he drinks too much, though.
On occasion. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. If he sommeliers a little too much.
yeah. Only when he's invited to the houses of families. So he keeps it in check. Yeah. Everything when I watched it the first time, it fired on all cylinders, and specifically because of Rust and his approach. Because I think I was feeling pessimistic about the world, like the world sucks, and people, are only out to basically fend for themselves, and they're under the delusion that they've got there's some importance to their own life when really there is none, and we should all walk hand in hand into oblivion, all that kind of stuff. So, you got a lot to look forward to, I think.
Stop saying that.
Remembering my experience,
Yeah.
That's as much as I can impart.
Well, I mean,
are you looking for something else?
No, I'm not looking for anything specifically. I don't see it that way.
Yeah.
I find him interesting as a character, but I don't feel I'm not jiving with his worldview.
Okay.
I don't like his worldview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I find him fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he is correct on a lot of things so far. But I don't resonate as you might have. In fact, the reason I think I'm so interested in him is because there's so little resonance, whereas I would hope there would be more. Because I'm an extremely optimistic person, and I'm very hopeful, and I'm very purpose driven. At the same time, on the basic level, everything that he says about the reality of humanity is correct, but the way that that's bent, almost refracted through a prism, can make one either extremely hopeful, optimistic, and purpose-driven, or negative, pessimistic, down on everything, given up. And I think he's on one side of the prism. And because he's on the opposite side of the prism from myself, I'm very curious about how he got there and how he's going to develop. So I think you maybe before were on that side of the prism, the same side that he's on, that side of the refraction. And his, whatever yours was, the prism for him would have been the event that maybe he's mentioned several times, that his daughter is dead and his wife left him. That's probably the thing that colors it, right? So that's why I'm interested in him. I want to know why I want to know more about why he's like that, and I want to know if he comes around at all. Because I think accepting the reality of who we are is the first step in becoming actually optimistic. I think the most pessimistic view of the world is, maybe not the most, but one of the most pessimistic views of the world is Morty's view. I'm sorry. Marty's view. Not Morty. Morty. I'll get it one of these days. Man, this Coke Zero is really doing me in. Because his view of the world is basically, if a new thing confronts me, and rather than letting it become a new facet of myself, I'm going to block it because it makes me uncomfortable. Because I am basically subconsciously living a lie, even though I don't know it. And, it's kind of sad that he isn't willing to explore the truth about the world. That makes me sad when I see it. And that's normal. And I find that to be the most sad and pessimistic thing there is. I think that's much worse than Rust's view. Rust is pessimistic and negative based on reality. And Marty, not Morty, is optimistic based on the lies that he subconsciously tells himself and the walls that he throws up against new facts, new points of view. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So do you think, do you think, having seen it several times, do you feel that your views of the characters deepen at all, the characters themselves, or are they pretty constant? Are there several readings of each one, maybe that I'm not seeing the first time around?
I don't know. I can't remember what I thought other than this is awesome the first time that I saw the series, and I liked both the characters, definitely Rust more.
Yeah.
As far as the complexity of their views, I think I understand a lot more of Rust's references now because I've just come across some of the sayings that he says, like the Schopenhauer thing. And then he references Max Mueller later on in the series. I'll mention that when it comes up. And so I think instances like that sort of deepen his character in the sense that, okay, he's got a big brain, and now his perspective is more fleshed out.
Right.
It's just more solid.
He's dropping the reading list.
Oh man. Yeah. It's a good one.
Take notes.
Yeah. And sort of one of the biggest themes in the show that is worth, I guess, bringing up now is how is the male-female dynamic throughout the entire show. And if you think of them as archetypal powers or dynamics of the male versus the female, it really came out on the last viewing of the series, and I think that is probably the most important theme in the show. It's probably the underpinning for the entire show, just looking at the role that women play in relation to all these men, especially Rust and Marty. And it develops throughout the series. You're going to see multiple occasions for them to sort of exemplify their perspectives and their approaches to relationships in the world. And then just take notice of how many women there are in the show and what role they play. Trying to think of any other. Yeah. And eventually that can be explained in a mythological sense, because you can look back at old stories and how they employed the role of male and female to get across a point or to illuminate some dynamic that humans have amongst one another. So I think, that's probably the most important thing that's been illuminated after multiple viewings.
Interesting. Yeah. It's something you have to kind of reflect on after you finish the whole series.
Yeah, I think the first viewing is just sort of an aesthetic viewing of, oh, this guy's cool. Oh, this guy's a normal dude. Oh, check out all this H.P. Lovecraft stuff. And, oh, man, this is kind of gory and bloody and esoteric and occult written. And then the second one, a couple of other things come through. And then by the third viewing, sort of the subtlety of the writing and the references and these bigger sort of subplots start to weave together the foundation for this top level plot, the top level action. And then by the fourth, it's just I don't know, it's
you're watching it. You're watching it on a meta level by that time.
Yeah.
You're swimming through the metaphors and the themes, as opposed to
through the swamp of metaphors and themes.
Looking forward to that. I'm going to try to do my fourth watching the first time.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've got a lot of time on my hands, I guess.
No, I mean, I have time. I just finished watching the entire Maniac miniseries on Netflix. It's new.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's very interesting.
Is it based on the old Maniac movie from the 70s or 80s?
Don't know. I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Don't know. Do you know the Pixar movie? Did you see that movie, Inside Out?
The Pixar movie Maniac?
No, Inside Out. Did you see that one?
I didn't. I know what it is, but I haven't seen it.
It's quite interesting because you have basically this little girl who's controlled by the aspects of herself, and there's no center. There is no self. There are just these competing emotions who are embodied little characters, little people in there. Yeah. And it's a very interesting exploration of the mind, and definitely deeper than the average, kids movie, for sure, because it really explores. It does away with the be your true self idea that's common in a lot of Disney movies. Be the real you. There in this story, there is no real you.
Yeah.
And Maniac, a lot of it happens between the characters who are doing this drug trial. And this drug trial has 3 stages, and on each stage they have to take a pill. The A stage, the B stage, and the C stage. A pill, B pill, C pill. And the pill is actually shaped like an A, B, and a C. And but they're plugged into this computer basically, and this computer has just become sentient, and it's directed by a Japanese director, and visually kind of cheesy. The computer is all of these flashing 1970s sort of spaceship buttons. It's not very futuristic, and a lot of it's like an alternate reality, where you have a lot of 1980s style computers, but a lot of high-tech stuff within sort of the aesthetic of 1980s, 90s computers, tan, sort of big keyboards, that sort of thing. A lot of flashing lights. So it's a very interesting series. It explores more than any other show that I've seen. It explores better than Inception, if you saw that, which I didn't really like. It explores where our actions come from and the subconscious and the way that it feels. Most of it takes place in the subconscious of the characters, and they play out these narratives, and 2 of the characters get locked together in narratives, and they both experience the same narrative as 2 different characters. But each time they do a narrative, they're a character embodying a specific aspect of themselves or fighting against a specific knot that is sort of tied up within themselves. They went to the trial because they have a problem, so they need to confront the problem. The problem is a knot, and the knot sort of needs to be massaged and loosened and straightened out. And so the narratives that play out while they're sort of plugged into this computer, interacting with this computer, which is also having its own personality problems. It's dealing with infancy, basically, and developing emotions for the first time, so that adds another layer to it. They are basically working through these knots in themselves at these deeper levels, and it's very well done. Sometimes it's very cheesy, but cheesy with, I think, intention. I think they intentionally make it quite cheesy, and the characters are very. Some of the characters are very cartoonish. The lead scientist of the project, he's very cartoonish, but I would like to discuss that one too if you care to watch it. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, it sounds good.
It's cool. It's cool.
Have you did you watch Mindhunter?
I feel like that's a documentary on Netflix.
It's a Netflix series. I think the first 2 episodes were directed by David Fincher. Maybe a few.
No.
Maybe
I'm thinking of another Netflix documentary series about the mind that's not called Mindhunter or something else. I don't know. No, I don't know. I didn't see Mindhunter.
Yeah, it's if you're interested in sort of why people do what they do and is it their fault, that whole discussion.
It's a good discussion.
We touched on it before about prison and what's prison for and all that kind of stuff. Then this is a series for you. So
we didn't really talk about it though. We
we just mentioned it. Yeah,
we mentioned it, but we didn't really discuss it. I think that's a conversation worth having, though, because I'm quite interested in the consequences that make sense for deviant behavior.
Yeah,
and the ultimate cause of deviant behavior, and the free will discussion is quite an interesting one, I think.
Absolutely, yeah, and if you can, if Mindhunter can show up on your listen time, I'd totally recommend it for exactly those reasons.
Okay, I'll check it out. And check out Maniac. Do you have Netflix?
Yeah, not right now. No, not right now.
You should get it.
Yeah,
get it.
I got a few things left to set up here, but and possibly in the near future. Yeah.
I did want to just ask you though, going back to the characters and the worldview. There was one thing I wanted to ask. Do you think that there's merit in Marty's way of being, his worldview? Is that a life worth living? Is that a valid way to see the world? Protecting yourself from the unknown.
Okay.
Following a code that's been laid down before you. Not exploring things for yourself in a way, but allowing the things that are handed to you in your culture to become your code sort of by default without questioning them. Seems to be what he represents. And I wonder if you feel that his character is supposed to be, by being the way he is, the virtuous character, or if he's supposed to be the one who represents he's the one who's just accepted everything.
It seems like in that case, even to some degree, even somebody like Rust, who may appear as though he's delved into every abyss that there is and sort of contemplated things as they are and not put up walls. Mm-hmm. That even he does that to a degree, but he may not know it. We all do. Everybody, no matter what end of the spectrum you're on, I'm totally open or I'm totally closed off and rigid like Marty, that there's a little bit of those polarities in each pole.
What would that be for Rust?
I don't know. I mean, and in that case, it could be that he may have actually exhausted all of the things he has to think about. So maybe he really hasn't put up any walls, but consciously, but maybe subconsciously he does that. Whereas so maybe Marty is somebody that is just, in his own example, he actually has exhausted all of the things to be curious about as well, but his consciousness hasn't expanded to incorporate, here's some other things that I should be curious about. Or like some of the things that maybe Rust says, he's like, I don't need to be curious about that. I've already got it figured out. There's no mystery there. I've got it figured out. And so he's erected a wall, not because he's decided to erect a wall himself, but because he doesn't even know that that's a wall.
Well, that's kind of what I mean by putting up walls subconsciously. He's not intentionally deciding to do that. It's not something he's aware is even a possibility for himself. Sure.
And as far as there being merit to doing that, then it seems like at some point we can't really control what walls we put up, because sometimes we don't even know that it's a wall. And so maybe in Marty's case, there's maybe he is putting up some artificial walls, and then maybe he's putting up walls, but he doesn't know that he's doing that. Kind of like maybe there's some examples in Maniac of people doing things subconsciously. They're just not conscious of their own activities. Whereas other people might be totally conscious of what they're doing. Kind of like if you go to see a psychiatrist and they tell you, hey, you're doing this. Oh, I'm doing that. I didn't know that, but now I know.
Right. That's kind of what Maniac explores. They have to, at the end of their experiences, they have to say those things to a camera, and they get a dot matrix printout. It comes out of a little printer. It says you are blah blah blah. It says gives them their diagnosis.
Huh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds good.
It's very interesting. It's a very interesting show. Totally different tonally though than True Detective.
Yeah.
Completely different.
Yeah. So as far as there being merit, man, that's tough, because then you kind of get into those questions of good and evil, and then if you question, well, what do we call good and what do we call evil, and then questioning why we call it good, why we call it evil, you get in some murky waters. Well, there, like another podcast worth of
sure, yeah,
discussion.
Well, I think that there's definitely merit in it. Probably hence the reason why that's the majority setting.
Status quo.
Yeah, that's why that status quo exists. Probably it's the most beneficial to perpetuating one's genes. I mean, really, if you are plugged into that mode, you're more likely to be at the right place of whatever hierarchy you may be part of, and you're maybe at the right venues for mating season, and you are involved in you are in the correct Venn diagram of life to be able to procreate successfully. because you have taken on those sort of things. And I think it's actually something I've been thinking about a lot recently, because my own worldview is more like Rust's, and I think yours might be too, unless Spain has changed you. But you're just a wino now.
Oh man, let me tell you, good wine is cheap here, and it's so good.
Hey, I envy you this much.
Come visit.
And this is all of it. This is the whole flask of envy that I have.
That's how much was in this glass when I started. I drink your envy milkshake.
I will ingest it as Flonase.
Ew.
Got to get those antihistamines. Very important during allergy season. No, I think that Rust's view is very precarious. As soon as you start jumping down into the abysses, plural abysses, it requires. So, all right, let's say you take let's say we took Marty and placed him in front of the abyss, and told him to jump down into it, right? Yeah. And let's say this particular abyss is questioning. Let's just say it's the God question. Does God exist? Is your religion real? Do you really believe that? Is it a real thing? Okay. Well, that is an abyss, because once you start digging into that, you have to honestly start asking yourself questions like, okay, who wrote the Bible? When was it written? When did the stories come about? Was Jesus a real person? You have to start asking questions that go deeper and deeper. And both of us have gone down that abyss, that particular abyss. I think we've both gone down that pretty deeply, separately in our lives. So, so if he's pushed off into that little abyss, there is a high probability that he will come out. There is a reasonable probability that he will come out with either a jaded perspective or an optimistic perspective. You don't have to come out this way. You could come out this way, and this way could be pretty bad. You could, because there's nothing built into not accepting a theology. There's nothing built into not accepting something that is inherently maybe positive in the way that you see the world. Not inherently, right? So every time you jump down into abyss, you have to climb out again, and it takes an effort to climb out again. Now you know more, maybe, or you know something you didn't know, and you have to sort of build your house again before you jump down into the next abyss. And so I wonder if maybe the Rust path is more precarious, and you'll get people who are very negative and people who are not on that side. Whereas if you're on the Marty side, the traditional side, you're more likely to just be a sort of rock-solid, stable guy, even if you're not, because the safety net of society makes you at least have to pretend that you're rock-solid, even if you aren't, emotionally and financially or whatever. I'm not talking about morality, because I think morality is a different question. I think morality is something that's programmed in on a pretty deep level, and I think we give too much credit to that thin layer of consciousness. We give way too much credit to that for our morality. We think that a lot of it is up here, but actually I think a lot of our morality is pretty built in, no matter what. But I think as far as perspective goes, and seeing the world as kind of a dismal place, and we should all walk hand in hand into, what is it? The abyss? Is that what it is? Oblivion. We should all walk hand in hand into oblivion. That is a totally viable way to view the world after you've gone through what he's gone through and sort of explored intellectually what he's explored. So I think the virtue of Marty's side is, by putting up the walls, you are very likely to be in the Venn diagram. I've got a mess of analogies going on here that I've just strung together just now, so I apologize for that, but that's the best I can do on my Coke Zero high that I'm on.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, what I just said?
But so in that sense, Marty is the more, because he has that resiliency because of ignorance, which is sort of virtuous.
He doesn't have to use resilience, because his resilience is built into the system that he's part of.
Yeah.
So you get like...
Yeah.
It's like being a soldier and getting rations. If you're not in the army, you get nothing, but if you're a soldier, you get rations. So just by being in the army, you get it for free. And so you don't have to have resilience, because you've just sort of said, yeah, okay, default, okay. And as soon as that happens, everything is just there for you. And all you have to do is sort of lay down and relax and float downstream until you die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just take step 1, 2, and 3.
Well,
just
yeah,
follow.
Yeah, exactly. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is that the virtue is that you're at the right place of the Venn diagram, even if you're not particularly, maybe you're not exceptional. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. But you're in a good position to procreate and produce something for the rest of us people.
Procreate and make another worker.
Right. Or another detective, even if it's not a true detective. I think maybe I'm not being clear because my analogies are kind of malformed. I was kind of trying to string them together as I was talking. I have a very clear understanding of what I'm saying in my mind, but maybe the way that I'm saying it is not clear.
Maybe it's all that envy I've been drinking.
I guess what I'm trying to say is there is virtue in the default, because the default requires less taking on responsibility for the existential terrors of being alive.
You can in that position you can actually act, whereas somebody who takes the time to explore and experiment, that is acting, but they don't necessarily see a stark binary of 0 and 1, black and white, good and evil, and therefore they have time, or they choose to play, explore, spend time, whereas somebody like Marty automatically jumps to, oh yeah, I know what that is, that's bad, I don't do it, so I'm going to do this over here. And so there's motion, there's activity, there's movement towards a goal. That's can be more rapid and effectual, whereas somebody like Rust, just as an opposite comparison, could take more time to explore and consider even what they shouldn't consider in order to then find out what they then ought to do. Like,
yeah.
It seems like in that case here, it's more of setting up a frequency of action, how often action is taken, decisive, making a decision, maybe yes, saying yes to this and no to that.
Right. So more, allowing the nebulous nature of possibilities to actually be there in front of you instead of immediately going to one side or the other and making a call on it. But also on his way of viewing the world, his pessimistic view, I think is more likely after you start to go down that path. So I think that's a negative point for the more rational view, because the rational view doesn't have to. It's not inherently optimistic. It could be, but it's not inherently optimistic.
Sure.
There's no little medallion that you can take in that path that is an optimism medallion. You can go either way you want with it. It's pretty neutral. And so if you have gone through some tragedy like he has, then it's going to be tainted that way, and that I think is negative. Whereas maybe if he were a normal guy, if he were more the Marty type, then that he might have dealt with that very differently.
Sure.
Yeah. I don't know. That's the more interesting part of the show for me so far, anyway.
Cool. Yeah, I think the symbology is a companion to all that. Mm-hmm. Like the whole edifice of esotericism and occult knowledge and all that stuff it's all woven together, and hopefully it's a complement to what you already find interesting. So
yeah, looking forward to the next one for sure. I'm going to watch it at 1 a.m. next week.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good.
All right, man.
1 a.m.'s good.
Thanks for the chat. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. It'll be cool to see what you think about the second episode, especially sort of. I hope the lenses don't obscure other things you might pick up, but.
Well, and again, the first time you go through something, it's like the first time you walk somewhere, as opposed to the 30th time that you walk somewhere. The first time you walk somewhere, it feels like it takes longer, and it also is maybe because you're paying attention to the immediate surroundings, a little harder to pay attention to what color the railings are, on the houses that you're walking past, or the name of the coffee shop, or whether or not there are references to Apollo, and so on. All right, man. I'm gonna go. Sure. I got to go to Manhattan and meet the shroom.
Sounds good.
All right.
Tell the shroom I said hello.
Will do.
Cool.
Talk to you later.
Yeah. See ya.
See you, Matt.